Hello, I'm Africa 54 Managing Editor Vincent McCory in for #the US. It's Monday, January 31st. This is Africa 54.
The African Union suspends Burkina Faso following last week's military coup. A Swedish-Kenyan group introduces electric buses to Kenya. And in a VOA exclusive, White House Chief Medical Advisor Dr. Anthony Fauci says the U.S. will continue aiding the global fight against coronavirus.
We begin our broadcast in East Africa, where Kenyan police say one suspect has been arrested and is being questioned after an improvised explosive device detonated and killed at least 13 passengers and wounded others in a bus traveling in northeastern Kenya near the border with Somalia. Kenyan police in Mandera County say the 14-seat bus was heading to Mandera town early Monday when it drove over the roadside bomb. Kenyan media reports cite witnesses saying they heard gunfire after the deadly explosion. So far, no group has claimed responsibility for the attack. To West Africa now, Burkina Faso has been suspended by the African Union from all activities in response to last week's military coup. The suspension is effective until constitutional order is restored, that is according to the AU. Burkina Faso is already under suspension from the Economic Community of West African States, although ECOWAS stopped short of imposing sanctions after the January 24th coup that ousted President Roch Kabore. An ECOWAS delegation, along with the United Nations envoy, were visiting Burkina Faso on Monday to meet with the coup leaders before deciding on next steps. And now, the Burkina Faso's new military leader, Lieutenant Colonel Paul Henry Sandaogo Damiba, has appeared on television for the first time, promising a return to constitutional order when conditions are right. David Doyle has more.
Burkina Faso's new military leader has spoken on television for the first time, promising a return to constitutional order when conditions are right. Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba has emerged as leader of a junta that ousted President Roch Kabore, accusing him of failing to tackle rising militant violence.
We must significantly reduce the areas under terrorist influence and the impact of violent extremism by giving the defense and security forces and the volunteers for homeland defense the will to fight and to go on the offensive with adequate means.
Damiba first appeared on Burkinabe TV screens on Monday. He sat next to a captain reading the statement announcing that Kabore had been deposed. Before then, he had relatively little public profile. He's the author of a book titled West African Armies and Terrorism, Uncertain Responses, and, according to the publisher, studied at a military academy in Paris. On Thursday, he called on the international community to support the country so it could emerge quickly and resume its march towards development.
I understand the legitimate doubts raised by this break in the normal functioning of the state. But I would like to reassure all friends of Burkina Faso that the country will continue to respect its international commitments, particularly with regard to the respect of human rights.
Damiba was promoted in December to commander of Burkina Faso's 3rd military region, which is responsible for security in the capital, Ouagadougou. That promotion came amid protests over surging violence and was part of a shake-up some analysts viewed as an effort by Kabore to shore up support in the military.
Well, David Doyle of Reuters fired that report. Now, at least one protester was killed in Sudan on Sunday as security forces in Khartoum confronted thousands of people demonstrating against military rule. Medics linked to the protests say 27-year-old Mohammed Yusuf Ismail was hit in the chest. There was no immediate statement from the military rulers who have been trying to contain a series of protests across Sudan since they seized power on October 25th. Security forces fired pepper spray and tear gas to disperse the crowds who were marching in defiance of a ban on demonstrations, according to a Reuters report. Protesters got within about 2 kilometers of the presidential palace before they were blocked by security forces. Now, the United Nations plans to host a summit this year with the theme of transforming education. The conference aims to provide an opportunity to address what officials say are the systematic issues that prevent children from learning. The meeting comes as the coronavirus pandemic continues to disrupt education worldwide. One group that is fighting to transform learning in the developing world is the Global Partnership for Education, which is helping to raise funds to address some of these challenges. The new chair of the GPE is former Tanzania President Jakaya Kikwete, who says the organization works to deliver quality education to both girls and boys. He recently met UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres about the upcoming summit. Now, viewers Peter Clotes spoke with Kikwete and asked him about the major takeaways from the meeting.
The most important thing which brought us here is that, next year, sometime this year, of course, in the Secretary General has announced our common agenda. And in our common agenda, they have put a lot of emphasis on education. This is for the first time, and they are going to convene a special summit on education, transforming education summit later this year. So for us in GPE, transforming education is our preoccupation. So we thought we would come and talk to the Secretary General, the Deputy Secretary General, get the feel of it, what is it, but of course offer our readiness to work with the United Nations during the preparatory stage of the summit, during the summit itself, and after the summit on the follow-up.
So what were some of the major takeaways of this meeting following this discussion?
Yeah, of course, the major takeaways from this is that we found there was meeting of minds. The UN also was ready to work with GPE, and they were finding some time at some point to reach out to us. So, but we brought ourselves here. So now they said they are ready to work with us, and we have agreed on establishing the mechanisms. My vice chair is going to work with the office of the Deputy Secretary General in the preparation. We also have officials from the Secretariat of GPE who are also going to be part of that. So we are going to initiate discussions now on the modalities of cooperation. What are the roles that the UN wants GPE to perform in that regard? But we expressed our deepest appreciation to the Secretary General for thinking about it, also to support the holding of the summit, and praying that the summit comes out a successful one. Because we need political will at the highest levels possible. And when we have a summit that is organized by the United Nations, or heads of state and government from member states participating and discussing their education agenda, I'm sure some of the challenges that we are facing now may have answers and solutions.
Well, Mr. President, talk to me about your anticipation regarding the education summit, especially as it's meant to provide an important opportunity to address the systematic changes that prevent children from getting an education.
Yeah, of course. Right now, I cannot say much, but our expectation, and when speaking to the Secretary General, in fact, he was quite categorical that that education has had, there was a lot of emphasis on the health sector, a lot of prominence to the health sector. Education has not been given that level. Of course, the other thing which I can say from experience is that even ODA for education has been declining. Even ODA for education has been declining, while at the same time ODA for health and infrastructure has been on the increase. No, that's fine. It's not a problem. But some of us are saying, well, increase everywhere, but don't increase at the expense of education. Yes, that's it. We are not saying don't give more money for healthcare, don't give more money for infrastructure, but it should not be reduced from education to give more money for education and healthcare. We think the world has enough resources to be able to give enough for health, for infrastructure, and for education.
Well, that was viewers Peter Clotis speaking with Jakaya Kikwete, who's chair of the Global Partnership for Education. In East Africa, Swedish-Kenyan group OPBus has introduced the first African-designed and manufactured electric bus in Kenya with the goal of cleaning up polluting public transportation. OPBus, Kenya's first company to make electric motorcycles, plans to launch the bus commercially in a few months and bring it to markets across Africa by 2023. Juma Majanga reports from Nairobi.
As other vehicles jostle for space while belching clouds of dark smoke in the streets of Nairobi, Benjamin Maina is driving a unique bus, one that is fully electric.
I feel privileged driving this vehicle. It's also very amazing when you are driving this vehicle compared to the fossil fuels vehicles, considering there is a lot of vibrations on fossil fuel vehicles and also a lot of noise. But with this vehicle, it's quite silent and very sleek.
Public transport in Kenya and across the African continent is largely run informally with no emission standards in place, making the vehicles highly pollutive.
If you look at the cities, the heavy-duty vehicles, which are buses and trucks, that's the bulk of the pollution, you know. So they are a big contributor to pollution. But as I said, they're also an opportunity, because how do we shift to cleaner modes? How do we shift? Because we need mass transport to be sustainable, to make cities more sustainable.
The introduction of electric buses into the African market by OPBus is aimed at remedying the situation.
This electric bus is a really important first step in the transition from fossil fuel vehicles to electric, clean mobility, right? And I think we really show precedence being the first movers in this market with a bus that's even locally developed.
The ride today is one of its own, having ridden on an electric vehicle. It's just cool, no noises like the combustion engines. There are no smells like the combustion engine. So it's just cool and awesome to be in these vehicles.
Africa's electric cars market, currently in its infancy, presents a huge opportunity for investment and the creation of green jobs, say experts.
When you look at our source of electricity, it is renewable. You know, for example, in Ethiopia, it's almost 100% renewable energy, hydro and such. If you look at Kenya, it's over 90-something%. So we have the energy, you know, we don't have to import fossil fuels, petrol, diesel, and all that. So we have the energy here. Then this is also a very good opportunity for jobs, green jobs.
As pollution and climate emissions from transportation rises, the urgency to transition to sustainable mobility grows, providing benefit for those who make the switch, like bus driver Benjamin Maina. Juma Majanga for VOA News, Nairobi.
We're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54. Join the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Still to come, a VOA exclusive interview with White House Chief Medical Advisor Dr. Anthony Fauci on the global state of the coronavirus pandemic. But first, Haiti Adams tells us what's coming up on Wednesday's Straight Talk Africa.
To join me for the next Straight Talk Africa, we'll look at the future of finding work in Africa. With a generation of young Africans more educated and more unemployed than ever before, what and where are the jobs of the future? Also, higher education with a higher purpose. We'll take you inside a one-of-a-kind African university that says it's cultivating future African leaders who will transform the continent. Join me, Haiti Adams, on the next Straight Talk Africa.
The United Nations Security Council meets Monday to discuss Russia's buildup of more than 100,000 troops along the Ukraine's border. Western and Ukrainian officials are on alert for a possible invasion. VOA's Arash Arabasadi has more.
52-year-old Mariana Zaglo is a mother of three. She works in marketing and lives in Ukraine's capital, Kyiv. Zaglo is also a territorial defense reservist willing to fight for her country should Russian soldiers amassed on the border invade.
I'm a soldier now, and of course I must follow orders. Whatever the order is, I will follow it. I will not kill people, but I will protect my home.
According to the Reuters news agency, Kyiv wants to build this reservist force to 130,000 people. Meanwhile, the United States continues sending weapons and ammunition to Ukraine following President Joe Biden's announcement of a small troop deployment to Eastern Europe. The U.S. plans to confront Russia over its actions along Ukraine's border at a Monday meeting of the United Nations Security Council.
The Security Council is unified. Our voices are unified in calling for the Russians to explain themselves. We're going to go in the room prepared to listen to them, but we're not going to be distracted by their propaganda, and we're going to be prepared to respond to any disinformation that they attempt to spread during this meeting.
Ambassador Thomas Greenfield added that a Russian attack on Ukraine is possible, saying, quote, "You don't amass 100,000 troops if you don't have intentions to use them." At a recent news conference in Moscow, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said the Kremlin wants mutually respectful relations with the U.S., but added what he called NATO's encroachment farther east as cause for Russian concern. In Washington, Ukraine's border has become a rare moment of political unity amid growing calls to bolster the former Soviet republic.
America always stands for freedom. You know, we are the country that believes that people's free will ought to be respected, that sovereignty matters, that the dignity of the Ukrainian people matters, and this is what they want. So their territorial integrity is at risk right now, and it is appropriate that the free world stand by them.
Meanwhile, arms continue flowing to Ukraine like British-supplied anti-tank missiles.
We do not want to be part of the Soviet Union or the Russian Empire or the Russian Federation. We want to be sovereign, we are sovereign, and we are fighting for our independence. And if Ukraine will be further attacked by Russia, of course they will not stop after Ukraine. So that's why it's in the interest of Europe and all democratic world to help us to defend ourselves, but also to show that the international rule of law still works.
NATO countries continue sending material support while the NATO chief has ruled out sending troops into Ukraine in case of an invasion. The West has ruled out Russia's demand that NATO promise never to allow Ukraine to join the alliance. Arash Arabasadi, VOA News.
For the very latest on the situation in Ukraine, Associated Press journalist Philip Crowther joins me live via Skype from Kyiv, Ukraine. Now, Philip, Russia's ambassador to the United Nations says there is no proof whatsoever that Russia is planning military action against Ukraine. Now, what is the explanation for the build-up of the troops along the border?
Well, look, officially the explanation, at least on the border with Belarus, which is only around 170 kilometers away from here to the north, are military exercises, joint exercises between Russia and Belarus, probably later this month. Now, other reasons that Russia gives is, well, essentially, according to the Russian ambassador to the United Nations just a short while ago, is that Russia has the right to move its troops around its own country, and that in fact those troops are not on the border with Ukraine. They are a few dozen kilometers away. That, of course, the view of the Russian ambassador to the United Nations. The United States sees this very, very different indeed. And it is, in fact, the United States and the administration of President Joe Biden that has been most vociferous about what it has considered for weeks already almost an imminent incursion or even an invasion of Ukraine. Very differing points of view there. Obviously, at the UN Security Council meeting earlier today in New York, we were expecting that. We heard also from Ukraine there at least an opportunity for everybody to get around the table. Now, we should say as well that diplomatic efforts are continuing on other fronts as well. There is communication between the United States and Russia. There will be a phone call this Tuesday between Secretary of State Antony Blinken and his counterpart, the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. And then, very interestingly, this Tuesday here in Kiev, we'll have the arrival of British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who wants to be an important part of the diplomatic effort to reach de-escalation between Russia and Ukraine.
Yeah. And indeed, President Joe Biden has said that the door for diplomacy stays open. Now, question is, you're right there in the middle of everything. What is the sense of things on the ground? Do people feel like there is an imminent attack on their country?
There's that fear, definitely. There is that tension, but also that lack of knowledge as to what exactly could happen, when it could happen, and how. Those are the questions that people here in the capital city, Kiev, will be asking themselves, of course. Would there be a small incursion in the east of the country, in the Donbass region? Maybe one in the north, on the border between Ukraine and Belarus? All sorts of possibilities. Will this include an aerial attack? If indeed military moves are made by Russia, that would certainly worry the inhabitants of Kiev. But at the same time, that war, that ongoing war in the Donbass region between Ukraine and Russia, or Russia would say separatists, pro-Russia separatists inside that area, well, that has been going on since 2014. It is an 8-year-long war. Ukrainians have almost become used to it in a sense. And that area to some seems a very long way away, of course. Maybe the threat here in the capital city of Kiev seems that little bit less immediate, if you will.
Well, we do appreciate your reporting, Philip. That was Associated Press journalist Philip Crowther speaking to us live via Skype from Kiev in Ukraine. Well, more than 371 million people have been infected by the coronavirus worldwide, and more than 6 million have died. Now, that is according to Reuters. In a recent exclusive interview with White House Chief Medical Advisor Dr. Anthony Fauci, VOA White House correspondent Anita Powell asked him about the latest global vaccination efforts.
What the president was referring to is that a year ago, we did not have vaccinations implemented in very many people. I mean, just relatively few people. Right now, we have vaccinations and boosters available to people. We are quite clearly, and we have to admit it, being challenged by various surges of different variants. We just recently got through the Delta surge and now we're faced with an Omicron surge. In the United States, the numbers are really concerning. We're averaging over 2,000 deaths per day. We have about 156,000 people in the hospital. And the cases are averaging between 600,000 and 700,000 a day. That's the tough news, the bad news. The somewhat encouraging news is that in many regions of the country, the outbreak has peaked and is turning around. We're seeing that explicitly and specifically in the northeastern part of the country, as exemplified by New York City, and in the upper Midwest in Chicago, also as far south as Washington, D.C. However, there are some states, southern states and western states, which are still surging, and some of them are starting to level off. I think the net effect is that you're going to see a peak and then an ultimate diminution of number of cases, and ultimately, as a late indicator, numbers of hospitalization. But we can't be overconfident that because this looks like it's turning around, that we're out of the woods. One of the things that we've got to continue to try and do is to get people vaccinated, because the data are extraordinarily clear. When you look at the number of hospitalizations and the severity of disease and compare unvaccinated people with vaccinated people, the difference is striking. I mean, very, very profoundly evident, the difference between vaccinated and unvaccinated. So it's a mixed bag. We do well if we're vaccinated and boosted, but we only have about 63% of the population is fully vaccinated, which means that 37% are not. So when the president says we're much better off, he's really referring to the fact that what we have now, we didn't have a year ago. We didn't have the vaccine implementation plan we have. We didn't have antivirals that were effective, and we have at least 5 now. We didn't have a lot of masks available. We now have hundreds of millions of masks, and we are now implementing about 500 million rapid tests in the next month or so, followed by yet again another 500 million tests. So if you look at across the terrain of what's available for the American public in the form of vaccines, boosters, masks, tests, antiviral therapy, we're much, much better off than we were a year ago.
I can always count on you for such a wonderful summation of everything. I'm going to have you move outside of the US, not literally, but in this line of questioning, to talk about vaccine donations and why, in summary, it's so important in your view as a health professional that we're donating so many vaccines to other countries.
Oh, it's absolutely critical. You address a global outbreak by a global solution and a global effort. And that's why the United States has been committed to and will deliver on vaccine doses to low and middle income countries. So let's look at what's been done thus far. Over 400 million doses of vaccine have been given to over 115 countries. The United States has given or pledged 1.1 billion doses to be delivered between now and the middle of this year as we get into the fall. We've given or pledged $4 billion for COVAX, and we are now working with the companies to expand the capability of the companies such as Moderna and Pfizer and others to be able to ramp up their production to make doses available more quickly to the low and middle income countries. So the United States is leading the world in that by far.
Well, that was VOA White House correspondent Anita Powell speaking with White House Chief Medical Advisor, Dr. Anthony Fauci. And that is our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching.